Trump and Xi are expected to discuss AI for the first time amid mounting alarm over the enormous cyber risks posed by models like Anthropic's Mythos. Joining me now in a Fox Business exclusive is advisor to the president and former AI czar and crypto czar, David Sachs. David, welcome to the show. I want to just quickly ask you about this Musk-Altman trial and your thoughts on it, because basically, there is no law, as I understand it. There's no law against a nonprofit moving to turn into a profitable company. So is this already won by OpenAI before the judge makes a case here, a decision?
You know, Liz, I've made it a point to not get involved in their lawsuit so I can avoid the fate of Satya there getting deposed. And so far, I've managed to stay out of it, and I'd like to keep it that way.
Okay, I know you're friends with Elon, but I'll continue to listen to your podcast All In, because I know you commented in the past on that. Let's get right to this presidential trip to China. Listen, one of the things, and there are many, number one, Iran, obviously, that the president has to speak to China on, but also the AI race. What do you think is appropriate when it comes to how China should be behaving when it comes to AI? There's a race. I mean, Americans want to be first. Chinese want to be first.
Yes, that's right. I mean, fundamentally, we have a very competitive situation with respect to AI. We're in a high-tech competition with China. Our labs are competing with their labs. Our companies are competing with their companies. And so fundamentally, it is a very competitive dynamic. That being said, I do think that there are things that may be in our common interest, and it's worthwhile to explore having those conversations. For example, in late 2024, in the last Biden-Xi summit, the two countries were able to agree to keep AI away from the nuclear weapon systems. I think that was a prudent decision. We've all seen that movie before and how it ends, and I think we want to avoid that fate. So I think that was the type of decision that's a good example of the two countries finding something to agree on that's in both of our interests, even though we are in a fundamentally competitive technology competition. So there may be other things like that. I think that I don't want to prejudge what they are. I think the point here is for the two sides to start talking, to establish an initial dialogue, and just to see how the Chinese are thinking about this.
Yeah, War Games with Matthew Broderick, one of my favorite movies, but that's the one. AI taking over the system, and it's a total disaster, or could have been.
Or Terminator, yeah.
Or Terminator, exactly. David, if Jensen Huang of NVIDIA is very vocal about his concern that the U.S. needs to maintain its leadership position, and he actually feels the way to do that is by selling any chips that he wants to China. And the issue then becomes, he's, by the way, not on the list to go with President Trump, which was interesting, not on the invite list. But are you concerned that, do you have the same concerns that Jensen Huang does, that the U.S. might be losing the AI race and we somehow need to be at the top of the tech stack, as Jensen puts it, everywhere?
Well, so we definitely want to win the AI race, and the debate is over how you do that. I think that we have had a bipartisan policy starting in the Biden administration and continuing in the Trump administration that the U.S. will not sell leading-edge semiconductors to China. However, the lagging or deprecated chips, those can be sold. And so there's been a debate over where that line should be drawn. I don't think Jensen is seeking to sell the leading edge. He may have a different view of where that line is, and that's something that is going to be always something debated. But I do think that there is now a sort of a consensus in Washington not to sell the leading edge to China, and then the question is just what lagging chips you can sell.
And do you think that Anthropic's Mythos, that cybersecurity platform, that AI chatbot that they came out with at Anthropic, which was so good, it got people a little bit frightened that somehow it could be unleashed on the world and bad actors could take it and figure out ways to hack everything and everybody. Would it be amazing to you that that might be the one thing that brings these two world leaders together in some type of AI agreement to just make sure it's regulated somehow?
Well, I don't think the fact that AI models are now developing advanced cyber capabilities is that much of a surprise. We actually described that risk, and we basically had action items suggesting better coordination around it in the AI action plan that the White House released in July of last year. So this is something that's been a known issue, although Mythos certainly showed a step change in capability. Now, I don't think that Anthropic was seeking to widely release that model, nor OpenAI. They have their own version of that model. So in a sense, there's been this debate about whether we needed an FDA for AI. That would be solving a problem I don't think we have, because I don't think those companies are planning to widely release those models. They're in a limited preview. However, the real issue is not what the American labs do. It's the fact that Chinese models and other models that that other actors could train are going to have advanced cyber capabilities within the next 6 months or so. And so we need to take steps now to harden our systems and scan our code bases to find latent vulnerabilities and patch them. Now, is it possible that the US and China could agree on, I guess, new standards with respect to cyber? I think that it's possible. I think neither country wants rogue actors to have these capabilities. But the fact is we have to still protect against each other. So I think it's going to be a little bit limited in terms of what we can achieve there.
David, it's good to see you. We should have you back to talk about that idea of somehow regulating AI. That's something that Jensen Huang sat on this set and said we need to have regulation. He claimed he was all for it. It'll be interesting to continue to watch. Thanks so much.
Thank you.